Okay, let's get into our guest. Our guest tonight is Michael Horn. He's a Billy Meier researcher. Give you a little bit of background on Michael. He is the authorized American media representative for the Billy Meier Contacts. The website is theyfly.com, which he's now researched since 1979 and proved to be absolutely authentic, and is the writer, producer, and narrator of the new DVD, The Meier Contacts, The Key to Our Future Survival. His very eclectic background, this is Michael now, film producer, prize-winning painter, designer, creator of the still popular fashion fad fingernail art, featured in Harper's Bazaar magazine, award-winning songwriter, one of the first creators of digital online book publishing, or ebooks, music and video producer, science researcher, national and international lecturer, frequent media guest, published writer, credentialed teacher, humorist, pioneer in commercial water purification applications for Starbucks apparently, set designer, healthcare professional, creator of the Future Self interactive therapeutic video technique, volunteer work with children and seniors. Michael is the creator of the Standing and Spirit Regenerative Movement Stress Relief Program, which Michael was invited to teach to corporate and government leaders in Europe, such as BASF, Eurochemy, Rabobank, KLM, Psycho Software, ING Bank, Meta Visi, I guess is how you pronounce it, by a consultant to Princess Diana. He's creator and teacher of the Sit and Get Fit videotapes and programs for seniors, as well as for personal and U.S. corporations like Xerox and Kendall. Michael has been featured in 2 issues of the International Martial Arts magazine, Inside Kung Fu, demonstrating advanced strength and flexibility. I believe it's Qigong exercises, and has articles published in Nexus, Mystic Pop, and UFO magazines. Additionally, More Than Just Survival, Michael Horn's new song CD of all original songs, has been released featuring the single Forgive Yourself. Michael, welcome to Paranexus Universe.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, you sound great.
Yeah.
It's nice to have you here.
My pleasure, thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. So you're a rather eclectic guy, eh?
Well, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention and a few other things. So I had a lot of necessity, and then I got busy and turned it into a bunch of different avenues of expression.
Yeah, sounds like it. That's really cool. So to start off with, why don't you tell us and tell our listeners, give us an overview of Billy Meier, the whole thing, how you got involved after that. But first, tell who is Billy Meier, and what is he? What's his connection to the world?
Sure. Billy Meier is a 71-year-old Swiss man. He lives in a rural part of Switzerland, maybe 45 minutes outside of Zurich. He claims that ever since he was a 5-year-old boy, that he's been having voluntary, wide-awake, face-to-face contacts with human beings, primarily of one race, although he's met with members, he claims, of other races. And he claims that these people who have been in contact with him now for 66 years have not only given him photo and filming opportunities, opportunities to record the sounds of the craft, these UFOs, as well as turning over metal alloy samples that were analyzed at IBM, but that they have helped provide him with much of the 24,000 pages plus of information that he has published. And he, I should add, is a one-armed man, and he types out at about 60 words a minute with one hand.
60 words a minute with one hand?
Yeah.
Oh.
That in itself is pretty impressive, because I don't think I can do that with 2 hands. Yeah,
I'm nowhere near that, actually. I'm a bit of a slug on the keyboard. But, no, Billy is a rather remarkable person who does not at all run around promoting himself. He stays, pretty much on target, working at home, working with his family and friends, and publishing his material. And he leaves it to other people to get excited about it or not, or to want to debunk it and criticize it and defend it and what have you. So he's a very straight-ahead human being, and I've had the pleasure of meeting with him 10 times in the last 9 years.
And you've been, just for our audience's information, you've been studying this case and researching it for well over 25 years, right, Michael?
Almost 30 years, since 1979.
Right. one question that comes to mind, I remember when those photographs came out in 1979 because I've been a UFO buff since I was a young kid, and the clarity was absolutely astounding at the time, and it really, as I recall, set the world, on its head for a little bit. And I was really wondering, in retrospect, how did those photographs first come to the attention of everybody? Could you kind of clarify that, or kind of elucidate on that for our audience?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. I think it was about 1977, between 75 and 77, that the lead investigator in the case, Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, who was retired from the USAF, received some documentation and early photographs from a woman named Lou Zinstock in, I think in Switzerland or in Austria, and she had come into possession of some of Meier's information and seen these amazing photographs. So she contacted Wendell because she knew that Wendell had been very active ever since 1947, actually, in researching UFOs when he was still in the Air Force, and he continued that after he retired. So what happened was that Wendell started to read some of the information and look at the photos, and he found that it was all quite astounding, and he spoke to a couple friends of his friends being Lee and Britt Elder, who are private investigators, and they are also a bit of what you call skeptics. And they were kind of trying to caution Wendell that this was probably a big hoax. But he said, no, I'm going to go to Switzerland, I'm going to investigate this, there's something going on here. And so they said, okay, I tell you what, we'll come with you, we'll work on this with you, because basically we want to look out for you a little bit that you don't get taken in by some rube over there. So over the years, and their investigation started around 77, 78, somewhere in there, they remained, the most skeptical up until a certain period of time. And while they were in Switzerland, when they went there, over time, Meier showed them literally hundreds of photographs, all stunning clarity, and 8 film segments emerged as did a video. So that's the basics on how the photographs started to come public.
Now, when those photographs first became public, Michael, were they analyzed or reviewed by any major authorities at that time?
Yes, actually, there's a document on my website, a free document, on the home page there, probably somewhere on the right lower side, that says photo analysis.
Is that theyfly.com?
That's correct. Thank you. And there's a photo analysis and a sound analysis document. And if you read those, they take you through the details, the steps, the protocols of the analysis that was done at the time. I think they actually took at random 4 of his best photos and went off to analyze those. And I don't have it opened in front of me. I mean, I could, but it's one of those things you have to go through all of it and read it and recognize that what you're looking at is an analysis that was done professionally back in about, somewhere around 1978 or 9, but they were using their state-of-the-art equipment. And what they were doing is they were examining photos and films that were taken on very ordinary equipment well before there were home computers or any sort of special or digital effects available to Meier. And this is what began to really impress all of them, including Wendell, and not only Wendell, as I say, but Lee and Britt, because these things were holding up, standing up very nicely to regular, credible professional analysis.
The one thing I've wondered too, Michael, is Switzerland's a relatively small country, and I was just wondering, I know that, and I visited your website, which I think is great. You've got a lot of really good information on there for folks. But what I was wondering is, and I know you've alluded to the fact that Billy has had witnesses with him at many times, including, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, it's Semyasa?
So Semyasa
was...
That's one of the alleged extraterrestrials.
Right, and he's accompanied him on several times when Billy has done some of the photography and filming, correct?
Well, let me clarify. Semyasa is a female. She's one of the extraterrestrials, and she was the one who did the greater, what you might call photo ops with her ships. So Semyasa is the contact person that Meier took up contact with in 1975 for what are called these official contacts. And so a lot of the photographs you're seeing on my site or that are on the internet are said to be photographs of her ship that he took.
Okay, I'm sorry for not having that person right. But, you know, the one thing that I thought was really, or that the question that begs to be asked is, did the Swiss Air Force or anybody in that area pick up any, and I know that, you know, a lot of times UFOs aren't picked up on radar, but had there been any UFO reports that kind of correlated with, you know, the stuff that Billy had seen? Because Switzerland, your photographs of Switzerland is absolutely exquisite country. And
Yes.
It looks like you can see for miles and miles, and you would think that an object like that would be seen by a lot of people possibly, and maybe even picked up by the Swiss Air Force.
Well, you hit on some good points. So let me, in no particular order, let me answer it this way. Meier took photographs. I think they actually had a total at one time of about 10 or 11 when the Swiss Air Force sent up a Mirage jet to try to intercept the UFO. And so you have the UFO and the jet in the same photograph. Then it should be also told that there was a report, and this was published by someone in Europe, and that they got it from someone in the Air Force, that the Swiss Military Air Safety Monitoring Unit, I think it was called, recorded 236 UFO radar sightings above Meier's property.
Now, you know, that's something that people really don't understand about. You know, there's a lot of people that debunk your research, and you know, when you have things like that, I don't think that comes to light all that often.
Well, it doesn't. See, part of the problem is this: when you have something like that, that information was obtained, but it wasn't published in the newspaper, so naturally the skeptics want to jump on that. And while I do have that mentioned somewhere in the newsletter, I don't parade that as the best evidence because, you know, just to be fair, if I can't produce somebody from the Air Force who's going to admit, you know, that, okay, well, we won't rest our case on it. And fortunately, there's so much in the Meier case that we don't have to rest on that. And when you mentioned the skeptics debunking attempts, because they are attempts, and I'm sure we'll get into it, you know, during the show, the skeptics that I encountered, and I entered into a challenge with them 7 years ago, not one of them, none of them, including James Randi, have been able to debunk or duplicate even one of Meier's photos, and they had all claimed in writing, and one of them told me, but they had claimed that the case was a hoax, and Randi retracted that statement, and now effectively the last remaining skeptics will no longer answer the challenge. They just have basically folded.
Michael, is that because, I mean, is it a situation where the pictures can't be conclusively proven just because they're pictures, and you know how pictures can be altered even back in the 70s? I mean, or is that just because they have really looked at it and they just flat out can't explain it?
Well, excuse me. Let me give you a slightly expanded answer to all of that.
So,
what is known to be so, because the investigation of 8 years by Wendell and his crew, plus another 1.5 or 2 year investigation by Gary Kinder, nearly 10 years of investigation, 1,300 pages. The people from whom Meier bought his camera equipment, the only game in town that he could go to, and they went everywhere trying to find out if he'd gone anywhere else, they were the people that processed or had Meier's films and photos processed, and they sold him the only equipment he had. They know a couple of things for a fact, and the researchers were able to corroborate it. Meier never purchased any darkroom supplies, enlargers, chemicals, etc., nothing other than cameras, tripod, and film. So any claims by skeptics, and some tried to make it, that he had actually done some form of photo montages or what have you, well, that's, first of all, it was number one, ruled out. Second of all, it doesn't deal with what are those objects whatsoever. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting. When people talk about things like, this is an easily duplicated hoax, and that's a direct quote from Center for Inquiry West and Independent Investigations Group. They claimed in 2001, Meier's evidence is an easily duplicated hoax. So what they did is they took upon themselves the burden of proving the hoax. At that point, we didn't have to, at that moment, prove, well, these are from outer space. You've now made a claim that it's a hoax, so therefore, prove it. And they accepted the challenge to do that. What would proving it have meant? Now, I hope no liberties here, but maybe some liberty with the idea of the scientific method where you go to try to duplicate a result to prove that something is so or isn't so. They failed in their duplication efforts because they photographed a little model. And what do I mean by that? How do I know and why and how can I say they failed? Very simply, every photograph taken by any and every skeptic, and I, by the way, even have new posting on my site a link to another skeptic who went and made some videos claiming he could duplicate Meier's stuff, and you can see for yourself what his results were. But every one of them forgot some very basic things that I learned by studying the case, which was, which were, that small models, when photographed close to the camera, come out very distinct and clear with a lack of a hazing effect or any kind of atmospheric hazing around them. And likewise, they lack other features that can be detected through, closer analysis. And when you look at any and all of Meier's UFO photos and films, you don't see that as a problem. When you see a distance shot where the UFO looks small, it's also more blurry because of the atmospheric haze and the distance from the camera. When you see the UFOs closer and they're more distinct, you can clearly see that these are very well-crafted objects, whatever. Now, nobody has been able to make even a model for photographic or filming purposes that bears any resemblance, craft-wise and quality-wise, to the UFOs in Meier's films and photos. So this is a little bit long-winded, but people need to understand this is more than creating an effect. The skeptics tried to say, well, we duplicated the effect, which anybody can do. You can go and rent a sci-fi movie and you get the effect of something, flying around or not. But you'll also notice that even in the best of the Spielberg movies, for the most part, and although I'm not a big movie buff, people correct me, how many clear daytime UFOs, flying saucer spacecraft do you get in these films? The answer is very, 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 very few, because it's hard to create a realistic-looking UFO, flying around without some of the flaws that can be detected, either because it's a CGI setup or because it's a small model. So that's a lead-in to that kind of, critique.
Well, I'm looking at some of the photos on your site. There's one in particular, I think it's 829.
Okay.
Are you familiar if that's the ship, the saucer above the vehicle, the van?
829. Oh, yes. Yeah, I've got it here.
Yeah, and it looks like, that's what you were just talking about. I was looking at that as you were talking about it, and you look at that thing. It's impressive, but it just.
Yeah, what the heck? It's bizarre, and it's got to be a hoax, right?
Well, it looks like a model close to the camera because of the angle of it.
Right.
That's just the first thing. I might not prove it one way, but. Well,
here's a suggestion. For a moment, leave that page and go to, on the right side of the home page, underneath you, there's kind of a photo of me about the Ontario Science Center, and down right under UFO evidence on that page. Pardon me?
It was just noise on the line. Go ahead.
Okay. There's an article there that says the Billy Meier hoax exposed, Part 1, the wedding cake UFO controversy. Now, you see that one?
I'm looking. It's on the left panel?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's on the right-hand side of my home page, and it's down below the part where I'm standing at a podium there, and then you go down to the next section.
I see.
Okay? You click on that.
Okay, I've clicked it.
Yeah. And when you scan over that page, you're going to see there's quite a few photos. Some of them are a little mind-boggling. Some of them are, what is this and why is it there? And you're going to have the clearest look, very up close, at an object, that they say was sitting on the ground, that was in the air, nighttime and daytime. And also there is a video of this object linked from my homepage as well. But this article will take you through, a lot of the arguments and questions, and you'll even see down around figures after photograph number 7, you're going to see 2 photos that I took at almost the same spot, almost the same position as a lot of those above it. And I had a guy who's over 6 feet tall holding a box, and then I had the box put down in the foreground. And the reason for that was to show, in comparison, that if you look at the guy who's 6 feet tall holding this box, and then you go up to any of those photos, and you look at the actual amount of space that is occupied by that UFO, and you're going to see that you're looking at something that takes up far more of the space than this guy does. Now, people can argue about perspective and all these different things, but then you go farther down the page, and you've got some distant shots of this object in various treetops, in front of trees, and a distant hill. The last one on the page, figure 10, is actually, you can see a video of that, also linked right below that on my home page, where you could see Meier come into the screen on the video, and then he zooms in on the ship. So, if this was a small model, as skeptics would love us to believe, you can't get this, you can't have it both ways. You can't really have close-ups like this with all this phenomenal detail on this thing. And I'll show you something else if you're on that page. If you look at photo number 3 on this page, do you see the golden object?
Yeah.
It's tilted at an angle. And a couple things to point out. You can have a sense now of all these little light-like objects all around the rim. There's actually something like 100 of these precisely set jewel-like, light-like objects around the rim. Then, when you get to right above the lower set, the first set of globes, and then you look between the lower set of globes and the bottom of the second set of globes, and you compare that, you go down, you compare that with figure 5, for instance, you're going to see that the center core of this golden UFO extended out of the sleeve and created a greater space, a greater distance. So, and you know, I'm speaking, unfortunately, for people that are just listening to this or can't look at it and don't have, you know, can't really figure out what I'm talking about. It is a bit abstract, but you're looking at a different configuration of the same object, a significant one that in 25 years, I was the only person to find it and point it out. And I talked to Meier about it a year ago, and I said, Billy, in this photograph over here, this is a whole different dimension. The top part of the ship seems like it's come out of the lower part. He says, well, yes, of course. He says, oftentimes when they are preparing to fly, and even with the other ones, they extend the top portion because there's an additional room, additional space in there. And I said, well, nobody ever pointed it out. He says, well, you know, there it is. So they don't do a lot of trying to point out these subtleties. They leave it up to us to find it. Now, that's a lot of trouble to go through for a model maker. And the other thing is, if you look at the photos, you know, photos 4, 5, 6, etc., 7, when the investigators calculated and they measured and all that, they figured out, at first they thought too, well, it must be a model. Then they realized that the thing reads to be about 10 feet in diameter. So they brought it to a metallurgist. They brought the photos, and they said, can you duplicate this object? What would it take? What would it cost? We're talking about 1980. The guy said, yeah, I think I can make that. There's some problems, but it'll cost you $25,000, which Meier didn't have.
Oh, he should have come to me. I would have done it for $20,000.
There you go. Such a deal, as they say. Now, here's the thing to recall, and this is what Wendell told me. He said the problem was, what he was told by the metallurgy guys, he said, you know, your real problem here is this. On looking at these photographs, the metal appears to be a soft metal as opposed to a hard iron, like, you know, something, an iron structure. It's relatively soft metal. When you would try to weld those globes onto it, as they cool, they're going to distort the hell out of the whole object. This is a very difficult thing to do. Now, you have to remember that Meier is a one-armed farmer living in the boonies, and they looked around. There's 16 homes in that whole village or something. And they investigated, they talked to everybody, they researched, they looked for supplies, the whole 9 yards. And the thing is that if a man could do this kind of a thing, make something like this, which today nobody has ever, and one skeptic started to try and he stopped. This is not a simple object to duplicate. It's high precision machining. Goofy looking as it may be, that's not a piece of cake. No pun intended.
Well, let me
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask you about photo number 2.
Sure.
It's got a blurry car and a perfectly in focus ship.
Yes. And what I understand about this, see, Meier only had 2 cameras that he worked with in terms of 35 millimeter cameras. I don't know if this was the second one, but if you focus on an object that's in the distance for clarity, your object in the foreground is going to be blurry. So what you're looking at here is a clearer photograph of the UFO while it is just behind the car. We don't even know exactly how far. Of course, skeptics have said, like, if you look at photo 1, skeptics say, well, that's got to be a model tree and a model car. The UFO is too clear. But here's what really destroyed the skeptics' arguments. And I have an article. Pardon me.
It's just feedback on the line.
Okay.
You might want to turn your speakers down just a little bit if you're not using headset.
Yeah, because you're sounding good, Michael.
Okay, I'm not disturbed by the feedback unless you're getting it there. Okay.
Go ahead.
So on figure 1, and there are a couple other shots, you have to know that Meier took 63 photos of this object. Now, since all the films were brought in and developed at this Bear photo in Switzerland, the investigators and this guy, Gary Kinder, who was a skeptic and an author, went and interviewed the people. And what they found out is that whenever Meier brought in film, they always would get the whole film developed back, and they said there never were shots that could have even been mistaken for some kind of a setup, a bad outcome, a finger in a photo. They came back all, in continuity on these film strips, and only then, if Meier would want a specific one, developed, they would cut the strip or what have you. But there's so much in the investigation, so much trouble they went to try to figure out how if this guy was doing some form of hoax. If you can produce with one hand, or even with a whole crew of farmers, objects that look like this in photos that give the skeptics such trouble, what are you doing, milking cows? Get to Hollywood.
Yeah, and for those of in our listening audience, and for those that are in the chat room, visit They Fly and check out those photographs, because that's been the hallmark of Billy's work for the last almost 30 years, or is it over 30 years? I shudder to think about it. But the photographs are they're absolutely remarkable. Now, if I recall right, just to digress for a second, Billy has been selected, has he not, based on the fact that he is a very old reincarnated soul by these aliens?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
And what I thought was fascinating was I had viewed some of your interviews, and I thought it was fascinating the fact that they've been interacting with Billy. I just wanted our audience to clearly understand that. They've been interacting with Billy for a long, long time, and if you could just elaborate on that, Michael. The story that I thought was very interesting was about the village priest.
Yes, it's an amazing story. Meier, at the age of 5, had his first telepathic contact from this elderly man named Spot. This is the story. Now, let me just preface and say, look, there's things that I can prove as well as anything on earth can be proven. Other things I just have to say it's speculative because I have no way of proving or even disproving. Skeptics certainly can't. So the story is, go ahead.
Oh, you're free. That was just Skype acting kind of nutty from time to time.
Okay. The parish priest, Father Zimmerman, was apparently also telepathically contacted by the Plejaren at some point, and he was receptive enough to the contact and to the information, so that when young Meier finally would come to him seeking him to be his confidant, to say, hey, I'm having these strange experiences. Is this okay, Father Zimmerman? Zimmerman was able to assure him that it was a good thing, a safe thing, there was no harm, because at that point, young Edward Albert Meier didn't feel like he could even talk to his own family about this. And he just he started to have the face-to-face contacts with this man Spot. And he's having these literally out of this world experiences starting at 5 years of age that go on for like 11 years. with this one contact person, and then are picked up by someone else and someone else. So this is a story that goes back so far, and as you mentioned in your early question there about why Billy was chosen, again, this is the information. What they are saying is this, that there are spirits, human spirits, everybody's got one. It's an eternal and immortal part of the human being, and it reincarnates over and over and over throughout the course of time, millions of times in the course of time and evolution. And the purpose is evolution. It's a little different than strictly speaking what Darwin posited, but the point is this. They are saying that the spirit that currently inhabits a man named Billy Meier in Switzerland is one of these very, very ancient spirits that has volunteered, if you will, in the past numerous times to carry on a similar type of a mission. And by that I mean that it would play the role of a prophet in a given society, country, culture, what have you, to try to bring some truth and light to human beings. So this is the type of thing that a lot of people have trouble with. Let's just put it that way.
And in these contacts with Billy, did they let him know what his mission was going to be? Was he supposed to be in some way an emissary to kind of disseminate the change in our spiritual nature that these folks wanted to guide us through?
I think it's a good way.
Towards.
Yeah, I think you put it pretty well, actually. It's a kind of a thing where they claim that they, as well as others and others before them, have been heir to what they would call the teachings of creation, the true and eternal spiritual teachings that are made and meant for all human life throughout the universe. And when they say that, they are also saying there's so much human life in the universe, we have really zero concept of it. There's millions upon millions of races. Because they have gone through these difficult times, because they have already gone through a lot of the things that we are struggling with, and we are in a very critical time in terms of our survival, they want to make sure that this information is this time put into our world in a way that is least possible to be corrupted and turned into a religion. And so they have also said that the work that Meier is doing will probably only really bear fruit, because of us down here, over several hundred years.
What exactly are they? How is Billy, as the emissary, supposed to bring about that change? And it must be very difficult for him with all of the resistance that he's come up against. I mean, the UFO community has never really embraced Billy. In fact, it seems like they've kind of pushed him away.
Well, they've attacked him as viciously as the skeptics have. It's an unfortunate truth. It really is.
Why do you think that's occurred? Why do you think the UFO community has been so reluctant to embrace, his photographs and the research that's been done on him?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of quick reasons come to mind. One, they use this, excuse, they're too good to be true. So that's a very bizarre thing to say, but that's what the UFO community, a lot of them, had come up with. And then, of course, there's plain, old-fashioned human jealousy. And let's face it, if the Meier case is true, if it's true, most of those organizations are immediately defunct. What's the point? Are they going to still run around and talk about Roswell for the rest of life when there's nothing available in terms of evidence on Roswell? Hopeless. Can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
So, I will say, to the credit of MUFON, who had been pretty, best way to put it, hostile, they are having me back this year to make two presentations in MUFON facilities here in California to show the new film and to, answer questions, which I'm always glad to do. But you have to know that all the people that run around talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials and abductions and gosh knows what, they're going to be out of business effectively if they have to acknowledge, well, the Meier case is real. Logic tells us that if there are extraterrestrials and any of the UFO sightings that we see or know about are extraterrestrial, and most of them aren't, but if any are, there must be a reason for it. There must be some purpose and must be therefore some message or information. What could that be? And this is where the Meier case, kind of makes everybody nervous, because there is so much information. And when you go to research it and you dig and you find out, by gosh, it's true, he published it before the events happened, all the rest of this, we really almost need to forget about UFOs and get to the core of the deal. What is this about? What does it mean to us?
Now, Billy has been and still is being contacted on a regular basis, correct?
Yes, he has contact sometimes as frequently as once a week.
Okay. Now, I know that, having reviewed the website and knowing very little about Billy, I know that there's been many, many predictions that he's made. And I also know that, from what I've read, that Billy is like a top-notch record keeper, and he has documentation of predictions that have been, or actually what for our audience benefit, Billy has been, these messages have been imparted to Billy by several of his alien contacts, correct?
Yes, and some of the information Meier himself accessed through his own abilities.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know that.
So what are some of the latest predictions? Maybe there's one the one that comes to mind right away is, tell us and tell our audience, which I think is really fascinating, is Billy's connection or the knowledge behind Otzi the Iceman. Oh,
that's a fascinating story that you can read on my website. We put up an article about it, and oh gosh, that's one of the most amazing things, because it was in 1991 that Meier, first of all, had, in a contact that he was having, there's a transcript of it, and I think we put it up. Yeah, it's at the bottom of that page there. He was having a contact, and they explained to him about the discovery that was going to happen in the Utsul Mountains, about people were going to find mummified remains of a man who lived there, well over 5,100 years ago, and they gave some information on it and all. Now, this is kind of spectacular, because when you then read the rest of the story about, and you go to some of the links that are up, you find out that not only was that discovery made of the Iceman, but it took something like 10 years later, 10 to 12 years later, that the scientists were able to determine what killed this man. I'll just go to this part of the story because it's so amazing. The scientists brought the mummy into a hospital in Italy, and they did a CT scan, and they found an arrowhead lodged in the upper, I think, left portion of his back. So they concluded that he'd been hit by an arrow, that somebody shot at him, and then they, figured that he bled to death, or whatever the story was. Now, when you go back into Meier's documentation from 1991, which also was published in the book in 1996, so at the very outside, a minimum of 5 years before the scientists discovered what killed him, you read this. I'll just read the little part of it. His death happened at that time in such a way that he fell, caused by an epileptic fit, and was severely injured by one of his own arrows as he fell on his back. Now, let's face it. If we were going to talk about how somebody could die 5,000 years ago in a rugged environment, you've got a whole bunch of possibilities: falling, freezing, starving, drowning, being killed by an animal, being clubbed to death, knifed, shot with an arrow, speared to death, old age. Just an amazing, amazing amazing number of possibilities. So they say he fell on an arrow on his back, not in his stomach and not on his side. Where did the scientists find the arrowhead? In his back. And then another person that I know said, by the way, Meier's account has to be right, because if you understand what, let's say, primitive people, even up until 100 years ago or more, when they were hand making their weapons and tools, they would not leave arrowheads and knives and spears in animals or people, if at all possible. Now, there was no evidence that there was a big war going on where he was just one of the victims. So if you see, this is a detective story that we have here with Meier. This is a puzzle with a lot of pieces but no picture on the box cover. When we find these things because they are there to be found, we have to think. Now, it was just a coincidence that I happened to, what's the story, that I happened to have seen the article from National Geographic when I was searching the internet, and remembered that a few years ago a friend of mine had sent me a translation of one of the contacts, and that I had read that part from the contact too. So this is truly, it's like detective work. You see what I'm saying? It's an amazing, amazing thing.
But Otzi had a special relationship
with
the aliens, and if you could tell our audience how that came about and why they felt it was important to impart that knowledge to Billy.
Well, without reading into it, what I could say is they had two of their own ancestors, if you will, had been stranded temporarily, and they were on Earth, and they were at risk of being attacked, I guess, by a bear. And this was one of the guy who kind of came by and saved their butts, and they befriended him. Now, of course, it's an amazingly bizarre story, but they're telling this is the way they said it, and they described, where he lived and the name that he was given at the time, which they said was Urk, and that it belonged to a certain tribal community, and what their houses were like, and exactly how old he was when he died, and his standing in the clan. Because, see, what they're saying is because he was befriended then by the two Pleiaren that he had assisted, he took on a special status in his tribe. And they had even seen him flying off with them at the time and what have you. So this, of course, again, I have to say that stuff is, even as Meier says, that, people think it's just, being made up and charlatans and all this stuff like that. But then again, you get to the part where he correctly, 10 years in advance, is informed about not only the discovery, which happens a few months later, but exactly how this guy dies. So it makes us think. We don't have to say, well, everything has to be true, and we know this and we know that. Look at everything. That's why I post so darn much stuff on my website. And since we're talking about being on the website, if you go up to that page and you click on the article right below that, it says "Top Skeptic Retracts Hoax Claims." You'll see that the guy that we actually gave time in our special features in our film to make his best case. You go ahead and shoot us down here. Well, he finally has to say, and I'll quote, "I will also agree with Horn that the photograph section of the short version of my lecture was the weakest part of my presentation." That translates to say, I can't prove that the guy used models or model trees, and I can't duplicate it, and let me out of here. So this, and I'm jumping around because I want people to get a sense of the consistency here. Not that I would, abandon any argument that I make, but there is so much here for people to realize. If you then go up to the second article under news headlines, Academy Award-winning experts, special effects experts on the Meier film, probably impossible to fake. The poor skeptic contacts two guys at a company called Uncharted Territory. These guys won the Academy Award for Independence Day, models, special effects. I went and showed them Meier's photos and films, and I quoted them in our film. So he wants to get them to, refute any claims that they had substantiated that Meier didn't use models. So in that article, we've got a quote from them that was given to the skeptic that he had to put up because he asked for it. And the bottom line in that, and people can read, that whole quote for themselves, but bottom line, they say, and I quote, Yes, in regards to that shot, we mentioned we could definitely do it today with computer-generated stuff, but at the time these were supposedly shot, it would have been very hard, probably even impossible to fake this kind of shot. And then we have the link to where that film segment is.
Where is that mentioned on your site?
That is in the article called Academy Award-Winning FX Experts on Meier UFO Film. The article is actually called Top Skeptic Retracts Hoax Claims, and it's under the headline of the latest evidence. It's the third one down under the Iceman.
Okay, what are we on your main page or which page?
Yeah, if you go to my home page and scroll down the center, and you see the latest evidence, and you go to the third one down there, Top Skeptic. It's actually Top Skeptic Retracts Hoax Claims. Do you see that?
Yep, almost. Yep, I see it.
Click on that one.
Okay.
And then you're going to get a nice big article here.
Okay. I'm putting in the chat room for our listeners.
Yeah, I just jumped around here. I'm trying to think of. I was just talking about the other one, the experts claiming that it was impossible to fake. That's my mistake. That's the second one under news headlines.
Sure, I get it. I put it there. So we're good.
So if you go down about almost halfway on that page, third to halfway, you're going to see a statement, but to reflect on the statement that's in the film. And this was made by Volker Engel and Mark Wiegert, who are the owners of Uncharted Territory.
Very interesting. Okay, we're coming up toward the top of the hour, so we're going to mention a couple of things, and then we're going to take a break, come back, and continue our discussion with Michael Horn on Billy Meier. Just in case some of our listeners didn't get the website or are not in the chat room, the website is theyfly.com, and you can see a bunch of pictures and a lot of information there, and I will certainly tell you you've got a lot of info on that site. That's great. Wanted to also put in a plug for the Paranexus Conference coming up in Tampa this October, 24th and 5th, it's Friday and Saturday. We're going to have a great time, and if you haven't checked it out or are still not sure, we'd love to have you join us. The registration fee is only $99 for both days. We're going to have Paranexus Challenge on Friday night, where several team members, volunteers, go to a top-secret haunted location, and we're going to televise that or broadcast that live to the group. And then on Saturday, we've got a number of workshops on a variety of topics and more being added. And then Saturday night, we've got our Spirits and Shadows costume ball and a number of great activities planned. So it's a great time to learn, to network, and to meet new friends, to just have a good time. And we hope to see you there. If you want more info, go to paranexus.org. All the information is there. If you have any questions, you can certainly email us. Our contact information is on paranexus.org. Love to have you. Love to have you as a member of Paranexus as well. It's an association for paranormal researchers, for professionals, and those who take a serious professional interest in it. We are talking with Michael Horn about the Billy Meier case, and again, we encourage your questions in chat. We encourage your call-ins if you want. The number's there on the screen, 347-945-7799. And if you'll hang tough for just a few short minutes, we'll be back with Michael Horn. Welcome back, everybody. Doug Kelly here, your host, and along with Grant Rubendas, my good friend co-host. Hey, Grant.
Hey, everybody. Nice to have you here with us tonight, and nice to be talking to the folks in the chat room. And remember, we're taking your questions and calls.
Yeah, and we're having a nice discussion with Michael Horn on the Billy Meier case. Welcome back, Michael.
Thanks. Glad to be here. This is a fun one. Let's do it. Good.
Yeah, it's going well. Very articulate, and we appreciate that. There's a quick question, and Grant kind of answered it, I think, in the chat. Does Billy Meier ever speak publicly?
No.
Okay.
He did a little bit many years ago, but just doesn't do it anymore.
Okay. Now, as far as these beings that have been contacting him, which, if I understood you correctly earlier, he's basically reincarnated one of them. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually more than that. While he may have had incarnations in their civilization with them, or even with their forefathers long ago, his incarnations of particular concern have been on this planet for some period of time, at least 13,500 years, if
So
I remembered correctly.
so he's one of them inhabiting a human body? Is that?
No. His own spirit is older than any of theirs.
Okay.
He is quite a bit older, and we're speaking metaphorically because it's not that Billy Meier is older.
Right.
His spirit, or spirit form as they refer to it, is a far more ancient one than even any of theirs. So it's not that, pardon me, he's one of them reincarnated, quote unquote.
Mhm.
It's a far more, in a sense, complex cosmology, which unfortunately, since we can't really do too much with that information, at least even in a short period of time, doesn't always help people in terms of their understanding.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up to the previous question on speaking. Why not? Why doesn't he speak publicly?
Well, first of all, now he's 71.
Mm-hmm.
There have been 21 attempts in his life. There have been attempts on the lives of his children.
Really?
Yeah. There were kidnapping attempts that they managed to prevent. He has a lot of responsibility with the writing that he does. Plus, he has a young daughter, maybe 11 years old now, who was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, so she sustained at birth irreversible brain damage. So the family has a lot of work to do in terms of just assisting her with all of the developmental work that they do with her. Plus, he also supervises a lot of work on the property. And they are living in a rural area of Switzerland, very high maintenance. If you have ever lived on a farm or environment like that, you know there's always something that needs to be fixed, mended, rebuilt, built again, built anew, animals to tend, gardens to tend, etc.
Yeah.
And Meier's, this is what he does. He says, here, I've written what it is, that I'm to bring forward, and it is for others, if they want it, to get it translated into their own languages and to run with it.
All right. You said that he's very ancient soul.
Mm-hmm.
The question in the chat room is how ancient?
Well, again, I just want to be careful to say, here's the information as I understand it. What we're told, and this is the overview might be necessary. I mentioned before that the purpose of life, as they put it, is the evolution of consciousness, that a spirit comes in, very unconscious and unknowing, and through countless millions of lifetimes gains more knowledge, understanding, wisdom, capabilities, everything else, until the human being becomes more and more developed, more and more refined, and then moves into a semi-physical, semi-non-physical body. And then that period of incarnations that takes place in another region in space, apparently, is of a certain duration, also very lengthy. After that, the spirit goes into the lower levels of the non-physical spiritual realms, where it is a spirit without body, but it is conscious, it is a spirit, and it is now involved in, that level of development.
Okay.
Meier's spirit is said to have been one that long ago had entered into those lower levels of spiritual development, purely without, any body, and that much prior to that, his spirit had been in the most, let's say, famous in this realm of speaking most of this context. His spirit had been embodied as someone known as Nocodemian, and Nocodemian had been a leader of various races and a very, very highly developed being who was, one of those remarkable types that you'd probably see in some kind of a Star Wars movie, and you marry the technology with the wisdom of Yoda and all the rest. Okay, but what happened was after Nocodemian had gone through his evolutionary path and entered into the lower level of spiritual realms and development, apparently the peoples that he had been the progenitor, leader of, those races started to degenerate and move away from what they would call creational truths and spiritual pursuit and development, and became more aggressive and warlike and what have you, and that it was at that time that spirit form kind of voluntarily came back into incarnations so as to go back and settle that whole thing down. And this is said to be the time at which what was called the global peace combat troop concept was developed. Now we're talking a long, long time ago in terms of time and space. This wasn't happening on Earth.
Is this a BC type of thing, or?
Oh, BC?
Yeah.
You're talking millions of years.
Okay.
We've got all sorts of very, very, very long, time period chronologies here.
Okay.
And the Peace Combat Troop Force was a united force that at that time utilized also android types and what have you, that came about then under the control of this Nocodemian person to establish order again, to put down the rebellion, the lawlessness, and to create order so that peace could reign again among those peoples and that they could continue a more peaceful development, not the kind of putting down a rebellion of enslavement, as that was part and parcel of what these people had degenerated into, aggressive, enslaving, destroying types. So this is part of that story. And then in this incarnational pattern also, it came to be that this spirit form ultimately would take on the role of being a prophet in our world to try and get us back into a truly creational direction, not a direction of religions and beliefs, which were beginning to take foothold and which it could be foreseen were going to be very, very destructive to the planet, as is their, their point of view, and people can do with that what they want. So to give you the scoop on it, since it's not really a mystery, and again, it's simply the information in the case, he incarnated as Enoch or Henoch. Then it was, I believe, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, and Billy. Now, Emmanuel is not a familiar name to a lot of people, but the name Jesus is a familiar name. And what they're saying in the Meier case is there was no Jesus person. There was a man named Emmanuel who fulfilled the prophecy of a prophet named Emmanuel in Isaiah 7:14, and who was briefly mentioned once, I think, in 1:23 or 26 of Matthew, and his name will be called Emmanuel.
Right.
And so now this is the kind of stuff that people can debate, but when they go and they start checking into the book called the Talmud Emmanuel, about which information is existing on my site, and then you go to the site of James Deardorff, who thought that this was a Bible hoax and went out to debunk it, and then concluded it was the real book upon which the book of Matthew was written. You realize then, that the Meier case is anything but a simple UFO ET story, but goes to the heart and soul, no pun intended, of our religions, our beliefs, our histories, our everything.
Well,
and yeah,
Michael, can we just digress for a second?
please.
You said that was the book of what?
Oh,
Is this one of the lost gospels that we're talking about?
Well, it's not one of them as we know it from the news for the most part. It's one. It's called. Let me tell you the story of it. It's the Talmud Emmanuel, and it was in 1963 that Meier and an ex-Greek Orthodox priest by the name of Isa Rashid were led telepathically by the Pleiaren to the outskirts of Jerusalem, where they discovered and dug their way into an ancient tomb. And in this tomb, through digging around on the floors and unearthing some stones, some animal skin, resin-encrusted animal skin wrapped scrolls were discovered. And inside those those skins, they find these sheaths or pieces of scroll, and they were written in Aramaic. And it turned out, coincidence again, that Isa Rashid was able to read Aramaic, and he also spoke German. So his task was to translate as much of this as he could, hopefully the whole thing, and send it off to Meier. He was able to translate about a third of it in 7 years, send it off to Meier, translate it into German. And then the problem was that he had to flee for his life along with his family because members of a couple major religions found out that he had some very interesting scrolls, and they wanted them. So he and his family fled into Lebanon, and they secured the scrolls in the walls of a home they were staying in a refugee village there. Within about a week's time, the Israelis came in and destroyed the village, bombed it into oblivion, killed a lot of people, destroyed structures, and the scrolls themselves were destroyed. So at that point, Isa Rashid and his family had just escaped with their lives, and they fled into Iraq, where it is said about 4 years later, they were machine gunned to death, ostensibly by the Mossad in Baghdad.
Wow, interesting
Yeah.
story. Now, did Billy make any copies of it, or did he?
It would have been nice.
Write? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I'll tell you something. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, there's so many versions of. I mean, there's so many lost gospels, and their authenticity and the actual authors of them is always very questionable, even with the gospels, the standard gospels, the synoptic gospels. So, I mean, that's a very interesting sort of thing. What really the question that comes to my mind is, how the heck did they get out of there with that information? Because, you know, most of the time those people are really kind of very intensely guard the stuff that they, you know, that comes out of, you know, like, it reminds me of the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they were cultivated and
sure
protected.
Well, let's put it like this, and I have to be guessing on a few things, but let me answer something you raised before about the Gospels and how to authenticate. What's interesting here, among other things, is that when James Deardorff, whose site is linked from mine, went to try to debunk this, in the process of his research, among many things that he found, he came upon something like 325 different inconsistencies that existed in the book of Matthew that were resolved in the Talmud Emmanuel. And the amazing part to him, apart from the fact that they were resolved, was that about 125 of them didn't even exist as areas of concern for scholars until after the Talmud was not only discovered but published. So you've got this very tricky thing here. Then you get into a detail where there is a prophecy given by Emmanuel in this book, and I think it's in the 25th chapter of the Talmud. There is quite a bit of prophecy, and in addition to prophesying the apparent nuclear destruction, it reads like a nuclear destruction of Jerusalem that will occur in the future, he talks about a time that will come in the future when men, in their greed and hunger for power, will ignite the very oil of the earth and darken the skies. Now, I think we all...
Saddam Hussein and his scorched earth policy in the first war.
1991, correct?
You bet, yeah.
Well, we know with certainty, that the first German version of these scrolls was published in 1978. So this is the thing with the Meier material. There's enough stuff where you can go, here's the book and the copyright date, what are you going to do now? And to answer the question about, you know, too bad he didn't take photographs or that the scrolls didn't survive, in a way, I think it's kind of clever that they did not do everything they could to assure that. And this is the reason. Our religions, every one of them rests on a premise. It rests on the same premise. The premise is not only illogical and childish, it's completely inadmissible in any legal or educational format. Here's the premise. The premise is, what's in this book is true because this book says it's true. So, by allowing it happens, you know?
Amen.
So, okay. So, and I know there are people that disagree with that, but I've often said to anybody who tries to attack the Meier case on religious grounds, I say, look, you've got a belief that you can't support, and you're using that as your reference point. And it's an inadmissible reference point. We can take, you know, the writings here and prove the authenticity of it just through what remains in the information, not because the book says so. So by not having yet another book to worship like the original scrolls, we've done humanity a favor, that we don't create another idol worship situation and beat people over the head with it. See, the Talmud is going to be controversial and debated, and people will raise legitimately, how come there's no original copy and all this stuff? So they will have to then read it and on its own merits either think that it makes sense and could be truthful or not. And in that way, they reduce the possibility of turning all this into yet another religion to clobber people over the head with.
Well, let me ask you a question, if I missed the point here. What was the revelation? That was there a revelation directly pointing to the existence of Jesus Christ, or that that religion was something that was conjured up by somebody that's not indigenous to this planet for purposes of manipulating humanity.
Right. Right. Sure. Let me try to answer it this way. The Talmud, in addition to what I've already mentioned, gives us the perspective, the story, the point of view that this man, Emmanuel, spelled with a J in our, alphabet rather than an E or an I, that Emmanuel was this prophet that was foretold, and he was crucified. However, he did not die on the cross. He was taken down, and because they knew in advance that he was going to go through this misery, they had brought in healers from India and the tomb. And in our film, we show this where the tomb is supposedly based on the photographs that we got from. That's another story. But there was a rear entrance to this tomb, and so Joseph of Arimathea had brought these healers in. This was something that Emmanuel knew was coming his way, that he could not sidestep. It was part of his destiny, if you will. And he wasn't looking forward to it. He was a human being. Now, he goes through this, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't saying anything. It almost sounds like it's almost Gnostic in character, or in influence, because the Gnostics, as you well know, Michael, they were kind of wiped out by traditional Christianity as heretics. But they looked at it as a very they had a very different approach to religion and and man, how he could obtain salvation without a middleman or some sort of messianic figure.
Right. And you take it a step further, there's no salvation that was necessary. See, these ideas of salvation and sin and fallen angels and fallen people, this was the creation of the church in order to enslave consciousness. So when Paul and others with and after him came about to create Christianity, this was the beginning of a religion, a powerful religion,
of an institution,
of a business, of a world power that rests and relies on for its power the subjugation of consciousness, the promulgation of fear and guilt, the encouragement for relentless overbreeding and overpopulation so the coffers of the church can be filled, and not just in this last and recent century, but for centuries, the abuse of children by the clergy who can run around like it's Halloween all the time, dressed up, going yama yama, and everybody has these programmed reactions. And I'm sorry, but this is what it is. There's, as the play Aaron, as Meier, as any true prophets have always said, there is no need for an intermediary, an intercessor between you and the creation, between that which is true spirit, the source of all that exists, because it's already dwelling within you. And if you turn inward and call upon the element of this higher power, this spirit within you, this consciousness as well, to lead and guide and awaken in you, as was the original, quote-unquote, Lord's Prayer. It wasn't
the original intent. And so what we have is so with the Plagiarians, what they're trying to help us come to is that awakening of our own sense of spirituality, the lack of need to have any external vehicle get us there when we have all of the tools, all of the equipment to get to where we need to go through self-examination or
personal growth.
Absolutely.
Yes, self-examination. So when we say spiritual, yes, there's spiritual teachings and components, and they say, understand, this is a consciousness-related process. So when you say self-awareness and understanding of self, what they teach specifically, let's go to some of the basics of it. They say what we need to do, and they claim that this is a practice that they have as well. You monitor your thoughts consciously 24 hours a day, meaning even in your dreams, you are paying attention to what it is you're thinking, feeling, coming out of those thoughts, and the creations and actions that you birth as a result of that. By observing this, by paying attention, we start to see, to hear, to understand more about who and what we are, what we've taken on, and we start to question those thoughts that are maybe not serving us or that are not bringing us results in our lives in any number of ways, and that it is a lifelong process, and it continues from lifetime to lifetime. It's not about perfection. It's not about salvation. It's not about becoming holy or enlightened or any of that. It's about how to become what they call a true human being, and this is where self-responsibility begins. And the point being, when more and more and more people over time decide to take back control over their own lives via their thoughts and actions and feelings, then society changes from the ground up, because from this point on, we are in the age of false leaders. These are, no matter who gets in to whatever country in its office, for the most part, you're looking at dictatorial and misleading leadership. And it's not only that it's the leader. Very often you could have someone who could be, a good person, but to get into these positions of power, many compromises must be made, or they don't survive the process either. And it's another story. The Pleiaren are not political. They don't have political parties.
Well, let's talk about them more.
Sure.
The Pleiaren. Now, is that plural for the Pleiadians, or is that what's
no?
The connection?
Pleiadians is Pleiadian, and Pleiadians is the term that Meier originally was encouraged to use in 1975, though he knew, and the people who gave him that...
It was a facade, correct?
Yes,
so that he
that's
could prove
right.
that he really knew the Pleiadians.
Yeah, or Pleiaren, as they...
Because they're not located in the Pleiades, correct?
That's
they're
correct.
in a different type of continuum that's outside of the Pleiades.
Exactly, and beyond it, and then, some 80 light years even beyond, and as you say, in an altered, time-space configuration, which believe me, I can't explain.
Not in this universe, then?
Yeah.
Yes, in this universe, but in a slightly altered time-space. It's like a dimensional shift, but it's physical, it's worlds. I'm not somebody that could even begin to explain that stuff. But
now, Michael,
yeah.
The Pleiadians have imparted a lot of predictions about mankind's future, and what benefit is it to them to relay those messages to Billy?
Right.
What good does it do if we're kind of in this muck of where we're on the lower echelons, and we have oligarchies and we have all kinds of forms of dysfunctional government?
Right.
What would be the purpose of the predictions?
Well, let's just be really, cut to the chase on it. The purpose of this information originally was to, and this is a conclusion I came to after asking the question, what's the purpose of all this? Well, when I started to look at the body, which now consists of about almost 58 years of specific, prophetically accurate information published by Meier and either sourced from the Pleiaren or from him, and I see the level of credibility and variety and specificity, I asked myself, well, why? What are they doing? Then I got a hold of something called the Enoch or Enoch prophecies, which are also freely linked on my website, given to Meier twice, once in part in 1981 and then again in 87. And when I read the prophecies from 87 that include this idea that after the destruction of the WTC, the World Trade Center, America is going to launch a series of worldwide wars, and I'm going, wait a minute, I think I now see the whole picture. And here's the answer to your question from my point of view. They gave us all of this information, hoping that we will check it out and test it and arrive at a conclusion, not forced upon us, but voluntarily, that they have provided a source of virtually impeccable credibility, a foundation. Therefore, when they gave us the Enoch prophecies and some other information, forewarning us of the path of destruction, of utter self-destruction we're on, hopefully we would pay attention, because we would see that these folks, whoever the heck they are, however it was done, got it right. They were accurate and they were credible. And if that's the case, we should pay attention and take a hint maybe, and not let every greedy, power-hungry imbecile that aspires to power come in and destroy his own country and others in the process, and then other imbeciles who want to now wage war yet on other countries, because as the Enoch prophecies say, America will end up completely destroyed in the process, and they mean utter annihilation. And you can read it in the Enoch prophecies. I put them up on the website in 2002, and unfortunately, they have become all the more uncomfortably prescient and I hate to say it, accurate. So again, to try to answer the question, they gave us this information with the hope that there would be enough people who would dare do the unspeakable and think, so that
think for themselves.
Think for themselves and not be led like lemmings and sheep into utter self-destruction.
I guess the part about that troubles me, though, is they've stooped to the same tactics that our politicians are doing right now. That would be controlling us through fear. So
No.
how are they more elevated? And I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
That's fine, of course.
Why would such an elevated species of humanoids want to create this climate of fear when they know that we're thousands of years away from attaining that kind of enlightenment, and stoop to the same tactics that traditionally have been used by every religion or every political system to manipulate and control populations?
Well, actually, I would even posit that it's about 180 degrees different than that, and I'll tell you why. You know that, and you happen to be accurate, all of the controlling, fascistic, dictatorial, communist, Nazi, whatever, dictators and all used fear to try and cow and control the populace, and especially through lies and disinformation, not through enlightening and inspiring and uplifting, methods. Now, when you go into the prophecies and the information that Meier's published for 57 plus years, it's not that it's filled with doom and gloom at all. He foretold things that were going to occur, from cell phones to computers, as well as biochipping, from 2 planets beyond Pluto to AIDS, from the crystal meth epidemic to various moon launches. He simply published on his own and with their assistance information about things that would come, specific scientific discoveries, such as the information that I sent you guys on Mars, where in the last 2 weeks we had 2 major discoveries on Mars within a week of each other. One was the confirmation of water on Mars, and the second discovery was what? That there was a substance in the soil that was detrimental to life. Well, I sent you an email of this. I haven't even put it up on my website yet, but Meier was told all of that in 1 paragraph 32 years ago. So that when I say prophecies and predictions or prophetic information, I basically mean that there are 2 things here. 1, information that they give as prophecies or predictions, and 2, information that they give conversationally to Meier that turns out to be prophetically accurate. Now,
well, do you think, Michael? Here's my question: if that's indeed true, and I have no reason to discount it, but if the Pajarans wanted us to know that information, wouldn't it have been better to not have waited, not have imparted that information 32 years ago, and prior to a Phoenix landing, have gotten a hold of Billy and said, "Hey, Billy, this is what the results are going to be"? I mean, it just seems to me that would be more relevant. And why impart that information 30 years ago before we've even put down the Viking?
Well, very simply, to prove impeccably that the credibility of Meier is beyond explanation. In other words, how does a guy know this 32 years ago? How could he possibly know it? And that is what's so astounding. You see, if they tell him the day before, because believe me, the skeptics attack me and the material saying, oh, he could have known this and they could have found it here 32 years ago? Now, here's another one. You know that just in the last week, Russia attacked Georgia. And if you read a number of articles, there's different sources, there seems to be significant credible information that Russia was provoked by even covert U.S. and possibly Israeli actions over there to encourage and partake in Georgia attacking the Ossetians or whoever else, right? Now look, in 1991, the first copy of a book, Und sie fliegen doch, I think it was called, and Yet They Fly by Guido Musburger, was published in German, 1991, which means it had been in preparation for at least a year beforehand, 1990, maybe 89. Now here is 1 paragraph, and I'll read it because it seems to speak to this entire matter. And of course, the book was published in English in 2001 and 2004, also years ago. So here it is. According to Patah's statements, more or less serious setbacks are also expected in the freedom efforts of the now dissolved Eastern Bloc countries. A great deal of what has already been accomplished will most likely be destroyed. With great probability, everywhere in those regions where the population is not yet mature enough to sustain their newly won freedom, here we go, the people will behave so irrationally that their governments will be left with no alternative but to tighten the reins again and take unpopular actions. Joined with this are the completely unlawful interferences and covert influences by Western nations and their secret services. Altogether, these can lead to bloody conflicts causing a chain reaction which finally brings on the outbreak of a global war. So the danger of World War III is unfortunately by no means prevented. So we are getting this statement that was relayed to Meier here, and he gave it to Guido, and he put it in his book 17 years ago, 17 years before this uprising, the irrationality, then the unpopular actions, the unlawful interferences and covert influences, and the bloody conflict, which has started, and hopefully it won't go this far. So in this whole chain, where we're looking at what we call prophetic information, the purpose is still for us to wake the heck up and humble ourselves enough to at least see and look through information from those who may just have a better perspective and would like us to not blow ourselves off the face of the earth.
Well, I'd like to be one of them, to not blow ourselves off the face of the earth. Let's get into another aspect of the Plejarans. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Plejaran. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Plejarans. Have they? This is a question from the chat room. Let me go back up to it so I can get it right. The question says, Billy ever had conversations with them about other species and their agendas?
Yes,
perhaps species that are visiting Earth, such as the Greys.
Okay. I can give you again my understanding of the information. So I always want to put that out there. So it's also possible that I, can get something screwed up, but you'll be able to.
No, it ain't so.
Yeah. We never do that, Michael.
Right.
We're always right, except for one.
We're infallible here at Baronexus Universe.
Oh, I am bowing. I am not worthy. All right. As for other races, when you get into the heart of the material, and we have a section in the film, The Silent Revolution of Truth, we have 3 special features. One has to do with the skeptic, and another section has to do with what's called the true history of human beings in the universe. And they touch upon going back something like 28 million years, even though there's even greater histories, but they go back to about 28 million years, and they talk about the origins of certain races and how some of our own forefathers came into existence. To try to narrow it around to answer the question about other races, the Earth has been, since time immemorial almost, and maybe even so, when it was fit for any kind of visitation, was visited by races that have, many of whom have long since gone the way of evolution, but they were space travelers, and they would come, and sometimes they would stay for a little while on a relatively primeval Earth, and they wouldn't stay too long if they didn't have means of manufacture and regeneration of technology here, because they would not be able to do anything but devolve, and that indeed happened to a number of different, let's say, groups over time, where, let's say, they stayed here or they were stranded here, and they had no technology. Their ships died, and the technology died, and they would degenerate then into tribes for survival purposes, and some literally became like primitive tribes surviving in jungles and things like that, and they had to go also back up the evolutionary ladder to reverse that descent. And there's many kind of permutations of this. As it probably now is of most interest to people listening about other races here, what the Plejarans say for our current time is, yes, there are now 3 other races that they know of who are observing, who are monitoring and observing the Earth, but are not, and I repeat it many times, according to them, not interacting, channeling, contacting, talking to, meeting with, or working for any country, government, or anything else. And that there is such a huge disinformation campaign that actually started in 1915. I have a free article about that on the website, you have to dig. But this is part of a disinformation campaign about the exopolitical people have bought into this idea of benevolent extraterrestrials walking among us and in our governments and trying to help us. Any space-traveling human being that has evolved enough to have that capability, to have developed spiritually, would have to be beyond bonkers to want to come down here and walk around and say, hi, I'm so-and-so from somewhere. Could you get me a job at the Pentagon or under Area 51, please? Now, they are saying this is not happening. As for Roswell and those types of events, those crashes did occur. But these were not extraterrestrial humans. These were android beings that were the creation of more advanced humans, as in the Zeta Reticuli star system. There have been, according to the Pleiaren, some what we would call abductions, quote-unquote, or contact examinations that were not at all malevolent. There were relatively few and far between, but there are hostile extraterrestrials in the universe. We're not talking about the imaginary reptilians that are not on our planet anyhow, but we're talking about other races, certainly human races that are aggressive, hostile, dangerous, and that have, even in the past at some point, according to the Pleiaren, kidnapped and murdered people, never to be seen again. And we will have to, at some point in the future, deal with it. Not right now, because right now our greatest dangers come from us. They don't come from extraterrestrials. They come from us and the consequences of our actions, which are going to lead to more and more environmental damage with mega quakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, and all this stuff, as predicted long ago, not to scare us, to go back and try and answer that point that you raised, but to encourage us, since this is prophecy, meaning these are things that will happen if you do not make course corrections. And we're not trying to scare you into believing anything. We are saying here are the signposts that you must watch out for, because if this event happens and then that event happens, you are on the wrong road, folks, because the next event will look like this. Because they can do something that we can do ourselves. They can project outcomes based on known information. And almost anybody listening to our discussion tonight that would sit down and think this through can start to make prophecies and predictions in their own lives and in the lives of their communities based on what is known and, unfortunately, what is not known, the causes that have been set in motion. So to wrap it up a little bit on the ET thing, there are no contacts, according to them, going on with people on this planet, with the exception of the Meier thing, which irritates people. Now, to cap that off, if anybody can actually meet the standard of proof already established in the Meier contacts and put on the table a fraction of what he has, then it's certainly worth looking at. But to date, all we have are people claiming that they're meeting with extraterrestrials and channeling this and that, and they're saying, it ain't happening. It ain't happening.
Well, Alex Collier spins a good story.
You must know then my story about Alex Collier?
No. But I would. But before you get to that, let me just ask a question regarding what you just said. So let's just sum it up. What do the Pleiarans say, or do they say, about these abductions that are going on that are not always benevolent?
Sure. Yes. Those are primarily done by secret military operations, not only but largely U.S. They are done to create and to experiment with mind control and creating fear, and a lot of the you can figure out this kind of thing. You know, it is not extraterrestrial in nature, according to them, and they are saying that all of the reasons given for it, such as they need our emotions. My answer to that is, really? More anger, greed, jealousy, rage, and lunacy? That's in short supply. They can't get enough of that in their own worlds, and they're missing having it? Well, they need our genetics. I see. They need to have shortened lifespans, because obviously if they're space travelers, they have longer lifespans. They need less than 100-year, maybe year lifespans with all the degenerative diseases and infirmities that we have in our systems. Wow, that's really worth coming 50 light years or whatever for.
Yeah, that's a hard concept for me too. That they're here to dip into our very shallow genetic pool, because the thing that's really kind of disturbing about that is that almost seems to arise out of our own paranoia, and any spacefaring civilization that's coming light years or that has the capabilities to control time and space should be pretty darn slick at controlling genetics.
Yes, exactly, of course.
So why would they want to come in here and be messing around with our, protoplasm?
Yeah, well, they wouldn't, and logic speaks against it.
Maybe they want to do what we do. Maybe they want to combine embryos or something like right out of Frankenstein. I'm just
what about
comic relief?
What about implants? Do they say?
Well, what about? Look, we have fairly sophisticated technologies that we know about. There are also things we don't officially know about that go on in secret development through military, CIA, at levels. The CIA, according to Meier, the CIA has some, at certain levels of CIA, they have alternative craft, not of the capability of the Pleiaren ships by a long shot, but they have and account for some of the sightings that are seen of so-called UFOs are anything but extraterrestrial. And this is part of an agenda where they could create a false ET attack, and here comes martial law.
Yeah, well, that also makes one think about what's going on over there now in Georgia, too, because we've been kind of provoking this situation for a while now with the missile shield. And, it sounds like we're kind of roping ourselves into a pretty dangerous corner over there. Because had Georgia been part of NATO when all this occurred, we'd be at war right now.
Yeah. Well, there's a headline just today about Poland is signing on for the missile shield, and Russia ain't too happy about that.
No.
Now, let's just, if I may jump, you mentioned a fellow named Alex Collier. And let me tell you, and I will tell you this, and I stand by it. In 1986, I was in a small cafe in Sedona, Arizona with my daughter and a lady I knew, and we were waiting interminably for the avocado and sprout sandwich that they must have been growing. We were only 4 of the only 5 people in the place, the 5th person being, or pardon me, 3 of the only 4 people. I'm now hallucinating myself. There was another guy sitting back there, and we called him over, hey, you want to talk? And one thing led to another at Sedona, then we're talking about UFOs, and the next thing you know, we're into this, and Billy Meier comes up. I had just gotten the first book some, 8 years before or so, 6 years before, whatever it was. And this guy says, well, do you have the contact notes? And I said, what's that? He said, well, it's all the conversations Meier had between 75 and 78. I said, no. He said, well, look, he's come back when you're in L.A., come up to Decker Canyon, and I'll give them to you. So I went back, and this was a guy named Ralph Amagran. He was a retired IRS agent. And he was into a lot of, all this woo-woo stuff and what have you. But I went up there, and sure enough, he had all of, the Meier books and posters, and he had these 1,800 pages, and he was very generous, and he gave them to me. Ralph and I used to stand around at night sometimes overlooking the ocean there, and we were on a UFO watch over the hills of Malibu there, and everything that was in the sky that was moving, according to Ralph, was a UFO, even if it was a Cessna or a Seagull. So he had a very active imagination. It was a few years after that, after I was, reading the information that Ralph had kindly given to me, that I was at a Whole Life Times Expo in Los Angeles, and I saw Ralph. I hadn't talked to him for a long time, 5-6 years, and he was walking by, and there were a couple women with him, and I said, hi, Ralph, and he walked by, didn't acknowledge me, and I thought, that's really strange. I wonder if he's lost his hearing. So when one of the women who had been walking with him came by about 10 minutes later in the return direction, I said, excuse me, what's with Ralph here? And she said, who's Ralph? I said, you just walked through with Ralph Amagran. She said, no, that's Alex Collier, lifelong Andromedan contactee. And I said, Alex Collier. Oh, I see. So I thought, and then I, over the past or ensuing few years, I started seeing this Alex Collier character popping up and reading his stuff. And I'm laughing to myself. I'm saying, I guess Ralph really needed a new career. He had called me from a trailer park in Florida once saying, listen, I'm really broke and I don't know what to do with myself. What am I going to do? I said, well, I'm sure you'll find something. What he found was a new name, and he reinvented himself as a lifelong Andromedan contactee, and he was so foolish as to post a significant volume of predictions one of which included that on August 12, 2003, the moon will no longer be in orbit. And it went downhill from there.
Right.
Not one of his predictions, not one, apart from being, no pun intended, loony, not one of them ever, of course, came true. And on top of that, he made the mistake of doing video interviews, and I say mistake for this reason. In our film, The Silent Revolution of Truth, we bring in a consultant to the U.S. Army Special Forces, a man who taught them NLP body language reading skills. For Special Forces to read body language is a life and death type of a situation. You got to know in an instant how safe is this person? How congruent are there cues that they're giving off that most people wouldn't pick up that would show that they're dangerous, that they're lying, that they're deceiving. So we had this guy analyze Meier, even with the sound off, let alone in German, and we had him analyze the UN diplomat who also was a witness to the extraterrestrials and the UFOs. Both of these people get a thumbs up from him. They're not, these people are telling what they believe to be true. They don't appear to be lying. They're not making up stuff. Okay, great. When you watch Ralph Emigrant / Alex Collier do his nonsense interviews on extraterrestrial stuff where he has taken the Meier material that he read, altered it, corrupted it, and then thrown in his own extensive fantasies, you watch the man's eye movements and you watch his body language and you are watching a pathological liar. And I take full responsibility for what I'm saying here. It's not you. You're watching a pathological liar in action.
So you're saying that his real name is Ralph Emigrant?
Emigrant, that's correct. And this has not been disputed. I was called a liar by a guy named Michael Sala. There was a forum this guy had, and they were calling me all sorts of names. I'm lying, and Alex is the real deal. And finally, one of the people that knew Alex finally got to admit, well, he did change his name. Well, he did know Michael, but everything else is true. This guy is no more a lifelong contactee than someone who's in contact with reality. And it's really unfortunate that people like that go out there purely to make some form of profit and name for themselves and become famous. But they are just lying. He has not been able to produce literally one piece of evidence, not a photograph, not a sound recording, not a film, not a metal sample, not a credible witness, not another person who photographed shit. This is all this man's fantasy. And I told him long ago, I said, you're a very creative guy with an active imagination. He was leading people on tours through the hills of Malibu that he was calling Malamu, meaning Lemuria. I mean, he was seeing things that only he was seeing in rock formations and what have you. So
I hadn't heard that part of it.
Well, yeah, he's not real big on talking about these things because they all lend to portraying him as he actually is, which is a man who's a pathological liar. And Michael Sala, who's been endorsing this guy as part of his own credibility, if he hasn't already sunk his own boat of credibility with anybody that's looked at this stuff, I don't know what people are drinking and smoking. They have nothing. They just
sharing.
Pardon me? I'm sorry.
They're not sharing. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, they're not sharing. They're just simply generating all of this stuff about we must prepare for contact with extraterrestrials. They want to fancy themselves as important people who are going to lead the contact with our extraterrestrial sisters and brothers from space who are going to be arriving here any minute because they just can't wait to come down and meet with us, especially them. Folks, that ain't happening, and it's only going to be several hundred years before anything even resembling that takes place on this planet if we haven't incinerated ourselves in the next 5 or 6 years.
All right, so
I guess the real question that begs to be answered is if this is such a benevolent, evolved, and enlightened race that's so concerned about our welfare, are they just going to stand back and let us, vaporize ourselves?
Well, here's the answer. They cannot, by universal self-responsible dictum, they cannot step in to save us from ourselves. They can give us all of the information and put it down here in the best way they thought was possible. We could argue and say it should have been done a different way, whatever, but this is what they did, being very gun-shy about creating another religion and getting now 7 billion people to go crazy if UFOs descend and anybody steps out of them to be attacked or worshipped. So what they can do, the only thing they're allowed to do by, if you will, creational law, is to prevent the planet itself from being blown up, because that would have far-reaching consequences in whole other regions of space. They are compassionate enough to know that while they don't prefer that we do this kind of harm to ourselves, that if we are foolish enough to take ourselves back to the Stone Age and have to do evolution all over again, that it will be such a strong memory in our race that in the relative cosmic blink of an eye of 1 million or 2 years, we won't allow ourselves to create crazy religions, insane political systems, megalomaniacal rulers who want to blow everything up at the drop of a hat, and we will then have decided to do this the hard way rather than the easy way. They have their own
certainly if evolution teaches us any kind of lesson, there's no guarantee that it'll be us this time around. The cockroaches might evolve, and they might be better off, you know. So, I mean, evolution's taught us that, because look what happened to the dinosaurs. They ruled for 65 or for hundreds of millions of years, and in the space of a heartbeat, they were gone.
Yeah.
And we're just an evolutionary experiment. But you would think the Plagiarians would know that, because if they're out there and we are somehow linked with them, we have some common ancestry, you would think that they would do that they would do everything possible to prevent that from happening.
Well, they know something else that I haven't said to you. They know that the human species will survive. They know that ultimately we will get our act together. What they may not know is whether or not we are going to choose with our own individual and collective free will to make this a painful and more lengthy process than it needs be, or if we will have sufficient numbers of people waking up and saying no thank you to destruction, no thank you to the bomb Iran crowd and the bomb this crowd, and take the hint on how you create a true global combat peace force, take the hints on how people start to take responsibility for themselves, take the hints. If we are not going to take the hint, and they tried to contact the Carter administration in 1979, and they did offer contact to them, but their offer, in my opinion, also was flawed, but it was also rejected by the Carter administration. Look.
Well, do you think that they were there when Eisenhower, did they make contact with Eisenhower? Because my understanding was, then because another group supposedly had come to Eisenhower and said, look, your consciousness needs to be evolved. You're not there yet. We're willing to step in and help you do that, but in exchange for our helping you do that, you must relinquish all of your nuclear weapons. To which point, good old Ike said, nuts, see you later.
Right.
So there's some similarity there.
Well, I don't know if that is true or not, that literally that story. I don't know. But
that's UFO folklore, of course.
Yes, it's folklore. The point is, all right, the point is this, guys. We have been given for a long time, in many different forms and by many different sources, information indicating we're on the wrong road. The Meier material, the Meier case, is the most suppressed UFO case and most attacked. Not only 21 attacks against him and his life, but blackballing this case from seeing the light of day. I'll tell you this very quickly. The Meier case and me representing it are the most requested story for UFO on Larry King's show, and I got an angry call from their producer that too many people were calling to request me to tell the story on Larry King, and they weren't going to have any of it. And this is then dozens of emails that I got copies of came to me. So this is something the mainstream does not want to touch because they can't make it another, ooh, what could it be? Do ETs exist? No, they'd have to go, wait a minute, who are these people that seem to know so much that are telling us that the imbeciles that we have here are about to bring us into self-destruction?
A person who does not at all run around promoting himself. He stays, pretty much on target, working at home, working with his family and friends, and publishing his material, and he leaves it to other people to get excited about it or not, or to want to debunk it and criticize it and defend it and what have you. So he's a very straight-ahead human being, and I've had the pleasure of meeting with him 10 times in the last 9 years.
And you've been, just for our audience's information, you've been studying this case and researching it for well over 25 years, right, Michael?
Almost 30 years, since 1979.
Right. One question that comes to mind, I remember when those photographs came out in 1979, because I've been a UFO buff since I was a young kid, and the clarity was absolutely astounding at the time, and it really, as I recall, set the world, on its head for a little bit. And I was really wondering, in retrospect, how did those photographs first come to the attention of everybody? Could you kind of clarify that, or kind of elucidate on that for our audience?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. I think it was about 1977, between 75 and 77, that the lead investigator in the case, Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, who was retired from the USAF, received some documentation and early photographs from a woman named Lou Zinstock in, I think in Switzerland or in Austria, and she had come into possession of some of Meier's information and seen these amazing photographs. So she contacted Wendell because she knew that Wendell had been very active ever since 1947, actually, in researching UFOs when he was still in the Air Force, and he continued that after he retired. So what happened was that Wendell started to read some of the information and look at the photos, and he found that it was all quite astounding, and he spoke to a couple of friends of his friends being Lee and Britt Elder, who are private investigators, and they are also a bit of what you call skeptics. And they were kind of trying to caution Wendell that this was probably a big hoax. But he said, no, I'm going to go to Switzerland, I'm going to investigate this, there's something going on here. And so they said, okay, I tell you what, we'll come with you, we'll work on this with you, because basically we want to look out for you a little bit that you don't get taken in by some rube over there. So over the years, and their investigation started around 77, 78, somewhere in there, they remained, the most skeptical up until a certain period of time. And while they were in Switzerland, when they went there, over time, Meier showed them literally hundreds of photographs, all stunning clarity, and 8 film segments emerged as did a video. So that's the basics on how the photographs started to come public.
Now, when those photographs first became public, Michael, were they analyzed or reviewed by any major authorities at that time?
Yes, actually, there's a document on my website, a free document, on the home page there, probably somewhere on the right lower side, that says photo analysis.
Is that theyfly.com?
That's correct. Thank you. And there's a photo analysis and a sound analysis document. And if you read those, they take you through the details, the steps, the protocols of the analysis that was done at the time. I think they actually took at random 4 of his best photos and went off to analyze those. And I don't have it opened in front of me. I mean, I could, but it's one of those things you have to go through all of it and read it and recognize that what you're looking at is an analysis that was done professionally back in about, somewhere around 1978 or 9, but they were using their state-of-the-art equipment. And what they were doing is they were examining photos and films that were taken on very ordinary equipment well before there were home computers or any sort of special or digital effects available to Meier. And this is what began to really impress all of them, including Wendell, and not only Wendell, as I say, but Lee and Britt, because these things were holding up, standing up very nicely to regular, credible professional analysis.
The one thing I've wondered too, Michael, is Switzerland is a relatively small country, and I was just wondering, I know that, and I visited your website, which I think is great. You've got a lot of really good information on there for folks. But what I was wondering is, and I know you've alluded to the fact that Billy has had witnesses with him at many times, including, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, it's Semyasa?
So Semyasa
was...
That's one of the alleged extraterrestrials.
Right, and he's accompanied him on several times when Billy has done some of the photography and filming, correct?
Well, let me clarify. Semyasa is a female. She's one of the extraterrestrials, and she was the one who did the greater, what you might call photo ops with her ships. So Semyasa is the contact person that Meier took up contact with in 1975. For what are called these official contacts. And so a lot of the photographs you're seeing on my site or that are on the internet are said to be photographs of her ship that he took.
Okay, I'm sorry for not having that person right. But, you know, the one thing that I thought was really, or that the question that begs to be asked is, did the Swiss Air Force or anybody in that area pick up any, and I know that, you know, a lot of times UFOs aren't picked up on radar, but had there been any UFO reports that kind of correlated with, you know, the stuff that Billy had seen? Because Switzerland, your photographs of Switzerland is absolutely exquisite country. And
Yes.
It looks like you can see for miles and miles, and you would think that an object like that would be seen by a lot of people possibly, and maybe even picked up by the Swiss Air Force.
Well, you hit on some good points. So let me, in no particular order, let me answer it this way. Meier took photographs. I think they actually had a total at one time of about 10 or 11 when the Swiss Air Force sent up a Mirage jet to try to intercept the UFO. And so you have the UFO and the jet in the same photograph. Then it should be also told that there was a report, and this was published by someone in Europe, and that they got it from someone in the Air Force, that the Swiss Military Air Safety Monitoring Unit, I think it was called, recorded 236 UFO radar sightings above Meier's property.
Now, you know, that's something that people really don't understand about. You know, there's a lot of people that debunk your research, and you know, when you have things like that, I don't think that comes to light all that often.
Well, it doesn't. See, part of the problem is this: when you have something like that, that information was obtained, but it wasn't published in the newspaper, so naturally the skeptics want to jump on that. And while I do have that mentioned somewhere in the newsletter, I don't parade that as the best evidence because, you know, just to be fair, if I can't produce somebody from the Air Force who's going to admit, you know, that, okay, well, we won't rest our case on it. And fortunately, there's so much in the Meier case that we don't have to rest on that. And when you mentioned the skeptics debunking attempts, because they are attempts, and I'm sure we'll get into it, you know, during the show, the skeptics that I encountered, and I entered into a challenge with them 7 years ago, not one of them, none of them, including James Randi, have been able to debunk or duplicate even one of Meier's photos, and they had all claimed in writing, and one of them told me, but they had claimed that the case was a hoax, and Randi retracted that statement, and now effectively the last remaining skeptics will no longer answer the challenge. They just have basically folded.
Michael, is that because, I mean, is it a situation where the pictures can't be conclusively proven just because they're pictures, and you know how pictures can be altered even back in the 70s? I mean, or is that just because they have really looked at it and they just flat out can't explain it?
Well, excuse me. Let me give you a slightly expanded answer to all of that.
So,
what is known to be so, because the investigation of 8 years by Wendell and his crew, plus another 1.5 or 2 year investigation by Gary Kinder, nearly 10 years of investigation, 1,300 pages. The people from whom Meier bought his camera equipment, the only game in town that he could go to, and they went everywhere trying to find out if he'd gone anywhere else, they were the people that processed or had Meier's films and photos processed, and they sold him the only equipment he had. They know a couple of things for a fact, and the researchers were able to corroborate it. Meier never purchased any darkroom supplies, enlargers, chemicals, etc., nothing other than cameras, tripod, and film. So any claims by skeptics, and some tried to make it, that he had actually done some form of photo montages or what have you, well, that's, first of all, it was number one, ruled out. Second of all, it doesn't deal with what are those objects whatsoever. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting. When people talk about things like, this is an easily duplicated hoax, and that's a direct quote from Center for Inquiry West and Independent Investigations Group. They claimed in 2001, Meier's evidence is an easily duplicated hoax. So what they did is they took upon themselves the burden of proving the hoax. At that point, we didn't have to, at that moment, prove, well, these are from outer space. You've now made a claim that it's a hoax, so therefore, prove it. And they accepted the challenge to do that. What would proving it have meant? Now, I hope no liberties here, but maybe some liberty with the idea of the scientific method where you go to try to duplicate a result to prove that something is so or isn't so. They failed in their duplication efforts because they photographed a little model. And what do I mean by that? How do I know and why and how can I say they failed? Very simply, every photograph taken by any and every skeptic, and I, by the way, even have new posting on my site a link to another skeptic who went and made some videos claiming he could duplicate Meier's stuff, and you can see for yourself what his results were. But every one of them forgot some very basic things that I learned by studying the case, which was, which were, that small models, when photographed close to the camera, come out very distinct and clear with a lack of a hazing effect or any kind of atmospheric hazing around them. And likewise, they lack other features that can be detected through, closer analysis. And when you look at any and all of Meier's UFO photos and films, you don't see that as a problem. When you see a distance shot where the UFO looks small, it's also more blurry because of the atmospheric haze and the distance from the camera. When you see the UFOs closer and they're more distinct, you can clearly see that these are very well-crafted objects, whatever. Now, nobody has been able to make even a model for photographic or filming purposes that bears any resemblance, craft-wise and quality-wise, to...
Okay, let's get into our guest. Our guest tonight is Michael Horn. He's a Billy Meier researcher. Give you a little bit of background on Michael. He is the authorized American media representative for the Billy Meier Contacts. The website is theyfly.com, which he's now researched since 1979 and proved to be absolutely authentic, and is the writer, producer, and narrator of the new DVD, The Meier Contacts, The Key to Our Future Survival. His very eclectic background, this is Michael now, film producer, prize-winning painter, designer, creator of the still popular fashion fad fingernail art, featured in Harper's Bazaar magazine, award-winning songwriter, one of the first creators of digital online book publishing, or ebooks, music and video producer, science researcher, national and international lecturer, frequent media guest, published writer, credentialed teacher, humorist, pioneer in commercial water purification applications for Starbucks apparently, set designer, healthcare professional, creator of the Future Self interactive therapeutic video technique, volunteer work with children and seniors. Michael is the creator of the Standing and Spirit Regenerative Movement Stress Relief Program, which Michael was invited to teach to corporate and government leaders in Europe, such as BASF, Eurochemy, Rabobank, TLM, Psycho Software, ING Bank, Meta, Vizi, I guess is how you pronounce it, by a consultant to Princess Diana. He's creator and teacher of the Sit and Get Fit videotapes and programs for seniors, as well as for personal and U.S. corporations like Xerox and Kendall. Michael has been featured in 2 issues of the International Martial Arts magazine, Inside Kung Fu, demonstrating advanced strength and flexibility. I believe it's Qigong exercises, and has articles published in Nexus, Mystic Pop, and UFO magazines. Additionally, More Than Just Survival, Michael Horn's new song CD of all original songs, has been released featuring the single Forgive Yourself. Michael, welcome to Paranexus Universe.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You sound great.
Yeah.
It's nice to have you here.
My pleasure, thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. So you're a rather eclectic guy, eh?
Well, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention and a few other things. So I had a lot of necessity, and then I got busy and turned it into a bunch of different avenues of expression.
Yeah, sounds like it. That's really cool. So to start off with, why don't you tell us and tell our listeners, give us an overview of Billy Meier, the whole thing, how you got involved after that. But first, tell who is Billy Meier, and what is he? What's his connection to the world?
Sure. Billy Meier is a 71-year-old Swiss man. He lives in a rural part of Switzerland, maybe 45 minutes outside of Zurich. He claims that ever since he was a 5-year-old boy, that he's been having voluntary, wide-awake, face-to-face contacts with human beings primarily of one race, although he's met with members, he claims, of other races. And he claims that these people who have been in contact with him now for 66 years have not only given him photo and filming opportunities, opportunities to record the sounds of the craft, these UFOs, as well as turning over metal alloy samples that were analyzed at IBM, but that they have helped provide him with much of the 24,000 pages plus of information that he has published. And he, I should add, is a one-armed man, and he types out at about 60 words a minute with one hand.
60 words a minute with one hand?
Yeah.
Oh.
That in itself is pretty impressive, because I don't think I can do that with two hands.
Yeah, I'm nowhere near that, actually. I'm a bit of a slug on the keyboard. But no, Billy is rather remarkable, the UFOs in Meier's films and photos. So this is a little bit long-winded, but people need to understand this is more than creating an effect. The skeptics tried to say, well, we duplicated the effect, which anybody can do. You can go and rent a sci-fi movie and you get the effect of something, you know, flying around or not. But you'll also notice that even in the best of the Spielberg movies, for the most part, and although I'm not a big movie buff, people correct me, how many clear daytime UFOs, flying saucer spacecraft do you get in these films? The answer is very, 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 very few, because it's hard to create a realistic-looking UFO, flying around without some of the flaws that can be detected, either because it's a CGI setup or because it's a small model. So that's a lead-in to that kind of, critique.
Well, I'm looking at some of the photos on your site. There's one in particular. I think it's 829.
Okay.
Are you familiar if that's the ship, the saucer above the vehicle, the van?
829. Oh, yes. Yeah, I've got it here.
Yeah, and it looks like, that's what you were just talking about. I was looking at that as you were talking about it. And, you look at that thing, it's impressive. But it just...
Yeah, what the heck? It's bizarre, and it's got to be a hoax, right?
Well, it looks like a model close to the camera because of the angle of it.
Right.
That's just the first thing. I might not prove it one way, but
well, here's a suggestion. For a moment, leave that page and go to, on the right side of the home page, underneath you, there's kind of a photo of me about the Ontario Science Center, and down right under UFO evidence on that page. Pardon me?
It was just noise on the line. Go ahead.
Okay. There's an article there that says the Billy Meier hoax exposed, Part 1, the wedding cake UFO controversy. Now, you see that one?
I'm looking. It's on the left panel?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's on the right-hand side of
Right.
my home page,
Okay.
and it's down below the part where I'm standing at a podium there, and then you go down to the next section.
Yeah, I see.
Okay? And you click on that.
Okay,
And-
I've clicked it.
Yeah. And when you scan over that page, you're going to see there's quite a few photos. Some of them are a little mind-boggling. Some of them are, what is this and why is it there? And you're going to have the clearest look, very up close, at an object, that they say was sitting on the ground, that was in the air, nighttime and daytime. And also there is a video of this object linked from my homepage as well. But this article will take you through, a lot of the arguments and questions, and you'll even see down around figures after photograph number 7, you're going to see 2 photos that I took at almost the same spot, almost the same position as a lot of those above it. And I had a guy who's over 6 feet tall holding a box, and then I had the box put down in the foreground. And the reason for that was to show, in comparison, that if you look at the guy who's 6 feet tall holding this box, and then you go up to any of those photos, and you look at the actual amount of space that is occupied by that UFO, and you're going to see that you're looking at something that takes up far more of the space than this guy does. Now, people can argue about perspective and all these different things, but then you go farther down